Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze how Mourinho's Spurs exposed Arsenal's right side in their 2-0 win in the North London derby. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have both sides starting in a 4-2-3-1, with Spurs dropping off into two banks of four, and that gave Arsenal the onus to break them down. When we look at Arsenal's shape and how they look to create chances, what we ended up seeing was that they did drop off into more of a back three, and that allowed Bellerin and Tierney to push forward. We either saw Xhaka dropping off into an inside left position to the left of Gabriel, or we ended up seeing Thomas Partey drop off deeper to split the center backs. If Xhaka did drop off into that inside left position, then Thomas was holding the center of the pitch and he was often closed down by Lo Celso and Harry Kane. The reason why Xhaka dropped off into that inside left position was to ensure that if Tierney pushed forward and lost possession, he was there to provide cover. Over on the right-hand side, Bellerin was allowed to push forward as well, but we didn't see Thomas Partey shift into that zone. It appeared that he was relying on his athleticism and he did shift across to make timely interventions, but what we ended up seeing down that right-hand side was Bellerin was pushing forward into advanced positions and Willian was in that gap between Dyer and Reguilon. Ultimately, that meant that Arsenal's attacking shape was more of a 2-2-1-5, with the fullbacks pushing forward to provide the width, Saka in the gap between Aurier and Alderweireld, and Willian in the gap between Dyer and Reguilon. Now, when you look at that shape and you have Spurs dropping off into two banks of four, Son was doing a good job of tracking Bellerin, but over on that left-hand side, there were times where we did see Bergwijn step into the path of Xhaka, and that left Tierney free down that left channel. With Saka drifting narrow to drag away Aurier, that created space for Tierney to run into, and with Bergwijn often caught ball watching, that allowed Arsenal an option to play balls out to Tierney. However, the biggest problem that Arsenal encountered was that they lacked a link between midfield and attack. When you look at how they were positioned, you had Lacazette and Aubameyang often isolated up front, and Spurs did a very good job of containing their threat and that midfield zone, because they had Lo Celso looking to close down Xhaka or Thomas Partey, depending on which Arsenal midfielder dropped deeper. And then what we often saw was that we had Højbjerg looking to close down Lacazette, and if he wasn't closing down Lacazette, then that saw Toby Alderweireld stepping forward to close down the Arsenal attacker. Aubameyang was often isolated with either Spurs center back, and with Arsenal's midfield duo in deeper positions, it often forced long diagonal switches out into the wider areas, and they couldn't find any way to exploit space between the lines. Now, what you would expect from Arsenal's attacking players would be to drop off into pockets of space to receive the ball, and Lacazette did try to do that, but like I said, Højbjerg tracked his movement, and when Aubameyang looked to drop off into deeper positions, he was tracked by the center backs as well. The last thing that we can say about that Spurs shape was that there were times where you did have Sissoko and Højbjerg dropping off into the gaps between the fullbacks and the center backs. You could see Sissoko shifting over to close down Saka on the rare occasion if you ended up having Tierney pushing forward. So if a diagonal ball was played out into the path of Tierney, Aurier could shift over and Saka would be tracked. And we saw something similar on the opposite flank with Willian shifting into that gap between Dyer and Reguilon, and Sissoko was closing him down, but there was no worry down that side due to the fact that Son did a diligent job of tracking Bellerin. Meanwhile, when we look at Spurs, there were two key themes that led to their success in that opening half. One was their midfield overloads, and the second theme was their ability to exploit Arsenal's right-hand side. When we focus on the midfield overloads, there was always a threat of Spurs having a 4v3 in the center of the pitch with Harry Kane dropping deeper. That was ultimately the difference maker between Arsenal and Spurs, was that Spurs were able to have their attacking line drop off into deeper positions in that midfield zone to receive the ball freely, whereas Lacazette and Aubameyang were struggling to receive the ball in space. When we look to the first example, we have Højbjerg picking up the ball from Dyer in Spurs' third, and as the midfielder breaks free towards the halfway line, you have Lacazette shifting over late, and that's where we see Kane and Lo Celso dropping deep into that center of the pitch to occupy Thomas Partey and Xhaka, while Willian's forced to step towards Sissoko, who drops into an inside left position to allow Reguilon to push forward to peg back Bellerin. Højbjerg ends up splitting the Arsenal midfielder for Son shifting laterally towards the halfway circle, and when he does receive the ball, he drops off deeper and lays the ball off into the path of Lo Celso to help Spurs push forward into Arsenal's third, and that ultimately results in Spurs winning a corner. Shortly after that, you have Højbjerg picking up the ball from Dyer just ahead of the Spurs box, and you also see Lo Celso dropping deep into his own half. But with Lacazette not stepping tight to apply pressure, and Saka prepared to push forward to close Aurier, and neither Thomas or Xhaka picking up a Spurs player, the host can overload the center of the pitch if the front three drops into the midfield zone. Højbjerg ends up splitting Xhaka and Saka to find Kane dropping off Tierney to receive the ball between the lines, as Gabriel and Holding hold their position ahead of Bergwijn and Son. But when Kane turns to break into Arsenal's half, his first touch is heavy, which enables Tierney to step in and make a challenge. And when we look to one final example, it's Dyer stepping forward to pull out Lacazette, and we see Xhaka near Kane, Thomas stepping into Spurs' half to close Lo Celso dropping deeper, Willian pushing towards Sissoko, and Reguilon pushing forward to peg back Bellerin. This creates a huge gap for Dyer to slide the ball around Lacazette to split Thomas and Xhaka to find Bergwijn in the halfway circle. Bergwijn is free to receive the ball and turn forward in the halfway circle because Son is occupying both Arsenal center backs, and neither wants to step forward to apply pressure because it leaves Son in a 1v1 situation. This sees Xhaka shift over towards Bergwijn, and Kane becomes an unmarked Spurs attacker breaking into the Arsenal zone. Bergwijn ends up sliding the ball across Xhaka for Kane pushing forward at the Arsenal backline, but Xhaka does well to shift across to provide cover for Bellerin to halt a Spurs attack. And then when we shift to how Spurs were able to exploit Arsenal's right side, there was a clear contrast between how Arsenal defended their left and their right channels. When we look to the build-up to Spurs' opening goal, it starts with Bergwijn nodding the ball over Tierney and Xhaka. Kane ends up receiving the ball ahead of Gabriel at the halfway circle, and that's where you see Thomas Partey shifting across to try and halt the Spurs attack. What you also see in that move is that when Kane receives the ball, Son is already looking to break into space beyond Bellerin. Kane ultimately pokes the ball across Thomas Partey, and that's where you see him play a ball between that gap of Bellerin and Thomas for Son breaking into Arsenal's half. When Son breaks into that left channel zone, it ends up pulling out Holding, but what you end up seeing here is that Reguilon begins to make an overlapping run beyond Son as Willian can't track his movement, and Bellerin looks to have recovered his position to provide cover for Holding. But the issue that Arsenal encounter in this move is that both Holding and Bellerin retreat from Son, and what should happen here is that Holding should step to the ball and Bellerin should shift across to Reguilon if that overlapping pass is played. If not, both Arsenal players should hold and look to close down Son, as there's no aerial threat breaking into the box, and if the ball is played out to Reguilon, they could shift over to recover their position. With both Holding and Bellerin dropping off deeper, that creates a gap for Son to curl an effort beyond Leno into the top corner, as Thomas Partey can't shift across in time to close down that threat. Shortly after that, you witness Dyer stepping into Arsenal's half with Willian holding his position, Reguilon pushing forward beyond the Brazilian on the left touchline, and Son dropping deeper to drag out Bellerin to create space for Reguilon to break into. Dyer ends up clipping the ball over Willian into the gap created by Son's movement, and what you see now is Reguilon pushing forward down the left channel. When Reguilon receives the ball at the byline, that forces Holding to shift across to close down that threat, but the Spurs left back attempts to connect with Kane peeling towards the back post, but Tierney does a good job of clearing danger. There was a time where Thomas Partey stepped into Spurs' half with Lo Celso shifting across to apply pressure, and his options up front are closed down by the Spurs midfield duo and their center backs. Dyer steps into Thomas Partey's pass for Aubameyang, and the ball is directed into the path of Lo Celso, but what we also see here is Son instantly running beyond Willian towards the halfway line. Lo Celso slides the ball across Willian for Son breaking down the left channel, but this time we see Holding immediately stepping forward into Spurs' half to apply pressure, and as we see Bellerin tracking back into his position, Holding does well to hold off Son to prevent another Spurs counterattack. And when we break down the build-up to Spurs' second goal, it stems with an Arsenal break that witnesses Lacazette splitting Dyer and Reguilon to play Bellerin free in right half space. You have Alderweireld shifting across, and Aubameyang beginning to peel off Aurier towards the back post. However, Bellerin's attempted pass for Aubameyang is short and played behind him, and that's where you see Aurier stepping in to win the ball to push forward. When Aurier steps out of the Spurs box, this is where he's approached by Tierney, Xhaka, Saka, and Lacazette. But the Spurs right back was able to split Xhaka and Lacazette to play in Lo Celso in acres of space. Arsenal's issue here is that both fullbacks and Xhaka are in Spurs' third of the pitch when Thomas Partey picks up an injury. When Lo Celso turns to break into Arsenal's half, Spurs have a 4v2 break due to Thomas's injury, and what Lo Celso sees in front of him is Bergwijn occupying both center backs while Kane and Son are free down the left channel. As Lo Celso approaches Arsenal's box, he has Kane holding his run, while Bergwijn and Son begin to speed towards the outside of the center backs into the half spaces. Lo Celso slides the ball to Son to create a 1v1 with Holding, who is showing Son towards the half space, but Spurs have a 2v1 overload with Kane beginning to make an overlapping run around Son. Son plays Kane on the overlap into left half space with enough time to fire his effort off the bar and in to ensure that Spurs were able to drop off deeper in that second half to preserve the result. Hi everybody, thanks for watching and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.